annual Dean Society call. We're going to wait for a few more people to join, and we're going to begin shortly. As we wait, I'd like to share what you can expect during the call. This call is being recorded, as you just heard, and the Chicago Booth team will make the recording available to you afterwards. All participants will be muted during the conversation between us and Dean Rajan. If you have issues with audio, you may want to shut down programs running in the background, or you can dial in from your telephone. That would work too. Why don't we wait a few more minutes? And thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. I kind of feel like I should hum some hold music. And I'm not sure anyone would want to hear that.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Bill Fitzgerald, and this is my wife, Alison. We will be your moderators for today's event. Like you, I'm a proud Dean Society donor, and I'm glad to have you with us today on this exclusive call with Dean Madhav Rajan.
The Dean Society at Chicago Booth recognizes donors who contribute $2,500 or more on a yearly basis to one of the annual funds at the business school here at the University of Chicago. As a Dean Society donor, you represent the top 10% of all donors to Chicago Booth, and you're the key leaders in the school's ongoing success. So thank you. Your investments of time and resources are critical to advancing the work of the school. On behalf of the school, thank you for all that you do for Chicago Booth.
Our presentation will last for 45 minutes today. We will moderate the conversation with Dean Rajan, and then we should have 15 to 20 minutes to answer questions. So if you'd like to submit a question during this time, please use the Q&A box below to submit the question. Questions and comments are welcome during our conversation, so please don't be shy.
If you have any follow-up questions, or if we are unable to answer all the questions that you had today, feel free to reach out to the annual fund at chicagobooth.edu. Again, it's the annual fund at chicagobooth.edu. A reminder that today is the last day that 2 limited edition Chicago Booth t-shirts are available with any gift of $100 or more. So get in those gifts so you can get your t-shirt. The link will be in the chat. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dean Madhav Rajan, the George Pratt Schultz Professor of Accounting and Dean at Chicago Booth since July 2017. Dean Rajan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Alison, for doing this. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to do this call and just have the chance to tell you how grateful we are for everything that you're doing for Chicago Booth and the investments that you've made in it. Your Dean Society donors, you are the top group that supports the school. You're leaders in the Booth community, and you help us sustain the great work that we do at the school, but also provide support for many of the innovative things that we have been able to do at the school. And I'm going to talk about some of them today. So this past year was, I think, a very exciting one for the school. We made some significant changes to the school, particularly in terms of the programs that we offer. As many of you know, we've always been a school defined by our MBA program and our PhD program, which actually, funnily, is older than our MBA program. But this past year, we added 2 new degree programs at the same time. One of them, a 9-10-month master's in management, and the other a 15-16-month master's in finance, for which we got support from our alums, John Liu and Cliff Asness from AQR. The first year, I would say, was a big success. We were, I think, pleasantly surprised at the demand that we had for these programs. And so we are continuing the programs. And this year, we actually added a global track to it, where essentially students are able to spend the winter quarter in London, use our campus there, work with some of our alumni companies there, do projects for them. So we're beginning it kind of, with sort of a pilot program, but we hope that this is eventually more successful. So with the MIF and the MIM, which is what we call them, these are programs where we are sort of at about 2 sections each. 120 is kind of the number that we're looking for each of them. But these students are amazing in terms of the GPA, things like that. So the average undergrad GPA for MIM is about 3.6, and for the MIF is about 3.8. So the interesting story about the MIF is that their quant scores on the GRE are higher than our average PhD student scores, which is pretty astonishing. A lot of them come from sort of undergrad, economics, finance, business administration, but the goal is eventually to make it really for particularly the MIM, for students who have done undergrad in humanities to be able to spend a year, take classes at Booth and get a master's in management before they take their first sort of real outside job. Interestingly, we're getting a lot of U Chicago undergrads coming into this program, and they are by far the most dominant. So I think we have something like 100 undergrad institutions represented in these programs, but by far the top is Chicago, followed by NYU, and then the University of Michigan. So the full-time program continues to do super well. I mean, we have obviously, we set a record for applications for the full-time program this past year, breaking the record we had set the prior year. That's doing really well. The full-time program, I would say, is kind of at capacity in the sense that I think we're taking about the number of students we can actually accommodate at the Harper Center, and also the right number, we think, given the number of applicants we have and the quality of students that we get. So the growth in our programs has really come from joint degree programs. As some of you may know, our most popular joint degree is one where you can get your master's in computer science and your Booth MBA all within, if you work really hard, within like a two-year period. This past year, we launched a new joint degree with applied data science, and that's become as popular as computer science in just 1 year, which is pretty interesting. We also have a 3-year JD MBA where, again, kind of interestingly, it began really well, but now we get fewer students applying directly to it. But a lot of students come to the law school and then kind of transfer into the joint degree when they find out about it. So that's kind of a different way that students are getting to a joint degree. Students, I think, continue to expand the set of things they're interested in. The way we do it is through our centers. We have centers that support entrepreneurship like Polsky, that support social ventures like Rustandy. We have different centers for like people who want to do VC or PE through our labs. One of our biggest new centers, actually our newest center, is the one in healthcare. It had always been an initiative. So the definition of an initiative is something where we feel there is faculty support, we feel there is student and alumni interest, but we aren't quite sure if it's going to become a center. So we began the healthcare program as an initiative a few years ago. And this past year, because of support from our alum, Mary Tolan, this was named the Tolan Center for Healthcare. And we've also added an MBA concentration in healthcare, given the number of students who are interested in that space. The other thing that we have seen that's really scaling is our Center for Applied AI. So this is interestingly this is, I think, the only center we have that doesn't have a name, but that's because the alum who is funding it has chosen to stay anonymous. So we actually have an alum who's been funding it for a few years now. And this center, I think, more and more has become very valuable as you learn about the impact that AI is having. And it's focused really on taking machine learning and AI and thinking about how do I apply it to solve important problems in business, in society, in kind of public policy, things like that. And it's scaling, I think, quite rapidly as well. We have a ton of new classes in that space in generative AI and fields like that, which I think is doing really well as well. Our two newest initiatives, meaning they're launched, but they haven't become a center yet. One is on arts and creative enterprise, really thinking about how do you combine arts and business and bring people together into that, right? So you can think of it as on the one extreme, if you have an MBA student who wants to eventually go run a museum, right, or a symphony or something in the nonprofit field, how would you support them? But on the other side, also thinking about how are things like AI affecting creative industries? Or how do we think about bringing creativity to entrepreneurs? So this, I think, is a very, I would say, exciting initiative. Obviously, a lot less sort of clear in terms of, a sort of direction where it's going to go. But I think that's what makes it exciting for the future. So I'm very excited about that. The other initiative is our family office initiative, which we launched, I guess, like a year and a half ago. Thinking about, given the huge amount of resources that are flooding into family offices, how do you think about actually managing them? And a part of it is, of course, thinking about finance and investing, but there's a big behavioral science component to it as well, right? How do you think about transitions, right, through generations? How do you think about having conversations about philanthropy? Things like that. So we feel, again, this is a very broad area. In both the arts, creative enterprise, and family office, we've been lucky to have faculty stepping up to oversee these initiatives. For the arts and creative enterprise, we have Mary Ittleson, who's our adjunct faculty member, who was very involved in setting it up. And Candice Prendergast and Alex Emus will be kind of co-directing it. Similarly, with the family office, John Heaton is running the program with support from Steve Kaplan and Ralph Koijen. So very, very excited about that. Um, one on the faculty side, I mean, I think we always define ourselves as a school by the caliber of our faculty and the contributions that they're making. We have 13 new faculty who came last year, 5 this year. We're at about 150 tenure line faculty. My steady state goal for the school is about 156 to 158. And so we'll sort of get there. The big sort of change we have made, which is super interesting, is we actually started a new faculty group last year. And I honestly don't know the last time we began a new faculty group, but this group is in applied AI, and it's interdisciplinary, meaning it kind of cuts across boundaries. So we've made 3 offers to faculty, and interestingly, all 3 of them have accepted. Um, and they're very different backgrounds from the typical person. One of them did a PhD in computer science at Stanford. He just joined our faculty. Another did his PhD in computer science at Princeton. Currently, is working at Anthropic. Will start next year. So we have sort of a bunch of new faculty coming into this space, and we're really excited about trying to grow it. Last thing I would say is on the programs that we do with the university, because many of you I know have kids who may be thinking about going to U Chicago. The business economics major that we began back in 2018 continues to ramp up amazingly. It's now the most popular major in the college, and it has something like a 25% market share, which is crazy if you think about it, right? It's by far the most popular major. We're also this year starting a new minor in entrepreneurship at the college. This is the first time that Booth will be doing, managing a minor. We're hoping to begin small, but my suspicion is that there's going to be massive demand for this as well. So overall, I would say our undergrad programs have been very successful. If I could complain a bit, they've been too successful, I would say, in that we're having to really manage faculty supply and how much goes to undergrad teaching versus to the MBA teaching versus to the new master's programs. But that's a good problem to have as opposed to having no demand. So I'll take it. Just want to, before we go to questions, say how much I appreciate what you do and your support. Even with the new programs, about 38% of our school's revenue now comes from alumni. If you think about both what they give expendably and the stuff we get from the endowment, and in particular, being in the top decile of individual donors, all of you enable us to fund these innovations, right? We could never have launched the new programs or have these new initiatives in arts or family office or before that healthcare without having the ability to just take seed money that you're giving as expendable, use it to launch new things in a good way. And the money you give also supports scholarships. So we, as you know, I think we have the highest percentage of veterans as students. I think we're way higher than our peer schools. I think last year it was kind of like at 11%, right? Which is nuts if you think about it. And again, all of it is possible because of what you do. So we couldn't nearly be the school that we are without what you do in terms of supporting both through philanthropy and the time you give to mentor students, to judge our competitions, to help us yield students, to help us identify students, and of course to hire them when they leave Booth. So thank you for everything that you do for the school. With that, happy to turn it over to Bill and Alison for any questions. I know some of them came in advance and others that you may get now.
Bill, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Madhav. I'd like to ask you the first question.
Sure.
You recently took an expanded role of Chief Global Strategist for the university. Can you talk a little bit about how this could impact Booth and its programs?
Yeah, this is something I started, I guess, as of July 1. The genesis for that was that the university has made investments abroad, right? And some of it is stuff Booth has done. Like, as you know, we have a campus in London that we used to do our executive MBA program in Europe. We have the campus in Hong Kong that we kind of shared with the university. But in addition, the university has a center in Delhi, it has a center in Beijing, and most recently, it built this big center in Paris, right, to support education, which I haven't seen yet. And I think partly what the university was sort of thinking about was that we have different units doing these things, but relatively little coordination across them and relatively little sort of a statement of why are we doing these things, right? What are we hoping to gain by doing it? How could we as a university have a more coordinated position on international partnerships, whether it's with companies, whether it's with governments? How do we think about regions of the world where we actually want to have a physical presence? And in the places that we already have a presence, how do we activate them more? For example, in London, all we do is teach the executive MBA program. In Paris, all the university does is to do study abroad, right, for college students who want to go spend time in Paris. So thinking about, okay, here is this great resource in Paris. What can we do to make it work better? Should we be doing conferences, other activities? Should we actually offer degree programs there? So questions like that, which we really haven't ever tackled at the university level. Paul Alivisatos, the president, felt that we really didn't have anybody who was overseeing the whole thing. Given that we already have experience as Booth in overseeing London and half of Hong Kong, he asked me if this is something I would be willing to take on. It's kind of it's been odd doing two jobs, like you're kind of having a day job and then this other job. And at the beginning, obviously, I'm spending a lot more time on that because that's a lot of it I just didn't know. But it's been fascinating figuring out the linkages across the university. I think it's been helpful connecting with people I might not otherwise do. Uh, the parts that I haven't really gotten into is the inbound part of it, which is like students coming into Booth, because that's usually handled by the Office of International Affairs, which deal with visas and things like that. But I suspect over time, that's going to be things that I'll have to think about as well. So I think it helps the school a lot in that with Hong Kong, for example, Bill, it was like the half of it was the university, half of it was Booth, which made it really awkward to think about managing it. But now in my new role, I sort of have full ability to think about Hong Kong and how is the university as a whole using it. And I think that's going to be a very positive thing for Booth going forward.
Well, if anyone can do it, you're the person that can do it. It sounds like a fascinating expansion of your role.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to the next question that was submitted. And research is a cornerstone of the Booth culture, of course. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the exciting research Booth faculty are doing this year?
No, I totally agree with you. I think research is what defines us as an institution, and bringing it to the students, which I think our faculty do better than sort of anybody else. I think one of the ways that our school has kind of had an advantage with the way the world is moving is that we've always been the school for people who want to do great empirical research, meaning research that uses data, right? It could be archival data, it could be experimental data, it could be structured, unstructured, that you get through field experiments or behavioral work, whatever it is, right? But thinking about data sources that are interesting, innovative, and then applying like rigorous analysis to them to come up with like prescriptions, right, for policy or to understand the world better. That's what we've always done. And as the world has kind of shifted to data being the most important asset, we've had a really sort of natural advantage in moving to that frontier quickly. And I think that that's something that you see a lot in what the faculty are doing. If I look at a field like marketing, right, as an example, marketing as a discipline has kind of bifurcated into two. You have on the one hand the quantitative marketing piece, which is as technical as anything somebody is doing in like econometrics, right, or like sort of big data economics research. Then on the other side, you have the work that's done in consumer behavior, understanding how do people make decisions. So interestingly, because we have the best quantitative researchers working on it, and we also have the best behavioral science faculty in the world, we've been able to put together this amazing marketing faculty. So a lot of the work that our faculty do is taking really deep disciplinary sort of foundations and applying it to solve important questions in marketing, like dynamic pricing, for example, right? Or if you think about the consumer behavior, the behavioral implications of the kinds of programs companies should done to market their products and services. So that I think is proceeding really well. The applied AI area faculty are really interesting. One of them is working, he's basically sort of in finance, but he's doing applied AI and thinking about machine learning and portfolio management, right? How does the rise of machine learning change the way that you would do portfolio optimization? Or if you look at accounting as a field, that's a field that AI is disrupting tremendously. And so we have faculty members doing research on, okay, how do I use, for example, large language models to extract signals from financial information that might not have been available in the days before we had all this data available and all this computing power available. So it's been really interesting to see faculty apply things like AI, but to solve important problems in their own disciplines. And I think that's been the really cool thing that you're seeing across the board, whether it's accounting, finance, economics, fields like that. So it's sort of an exciting time, I think at Booth.
Here's a question from the chat. Many business schools offer a separate graduate and undergraduate, business degrees. And can you talk a little bit more about how the undergraduate major is organized inside of Booth? Is it or will it become a new degree?
Well, that's a great question. So if I can go back a little bit to the history of how it happened, so the short answer is it can never be a business degree for the simple reason that the university would never allow it. So when we first conceived this degree, the notion was to do something like a business degree, but it became very clear that there was significant opposition to that from the college, particularly the faculty in the humanities and liberal arts who really didn't like the idea of Chicago, which has always been about, life of the mind and inquiry, having a business degree, which they thought was too professional or pre-professional. So we fought this battle for quite a while with the university and essentially failed. And that's when we pivoted to making it a business economics degree, where we effectively took the existing economics major and we cut it up into two pieces. For people who want to do graduate work in economics, they can do the traditional econ major. But then for everybody else, we created this business economics track in the major. So the way that works is that we don't admit these students, right? They apply to U Chicago. They have to get admitted to U Chicago to the college. And we don't touch them in the first year at all, right? They have to do the standard Chicago liberal arts curriculum in the first year. Then in the second year, they do core courses in, empirical methods, macroeconomics, micro, in the economics department at the university. We basically get them then after that in the years 3 and 4, where they teach electives taught by Booth faculty. For the most part, these electives are separate undergrad only electives. And the reason we did that largely is that in places where we have combined MBAs and undergrads into one, it hasn't really worked that well. Right? The undergrads are way more focused on the academic parts of the class, and they're much more grade conscious, if I'm being honest. And the MBAs generally aren't as conscious, so the fit doesn't work that well. Plus, having people who have had 4 years or 5 years of work experience combining with students who have never worked. That doesn't work well for certain type of courses. So we've kept them largely separate. All that to say, we don't really have a unit within Booth that oversees that separately. These are just courses that we teach at the undergrad level, and that eventually leads into the business economics track. From a financial standpoint, the way it works is that Chicago, the university, takes the net tuition that they get and allocate it to different units based upon what fraction of students you're teaching. So it's very much like an allocation based on butts and seats. And so we get allocated a proportion of that tuition revenue based on how many undergrads we teach. And our classes have been insanely popular. So this year we're teaching 60 undergrad sections, like 60. They're all full. So even though the classic U Chicago class is a seminar class with 12 students, ours all have 60 to 65 students in it. And that's the problem that I mentioned, that we're really trying to manage how we can offer the supply to teach these students. So I think this has in many ways been we sort of made a success out of a big failure. I don't think we'll ever go to a business degree because I don't want to deal with admissions and things like that, right? Let undergrad deal with it. But we are so popular, we're still going to get the best students coming into it. So I think we've ended up in a good place, actually.
Great. My question is kind of takes off from where you just ended, and with your new role or the expanded role, how can University of Chicago use the international assets to continue to attract talent, the international talent, to enroll at Booth? And then this is kind of a two-part question. And then what can we do as the alumni group to better connect with the students of Booth, these hyper talented students that you're attracting?
Yeah, thank you. So we've made a big decision as a school, right, that we will actually have campuses abroad. And that's unique now. Yeah, right. If you go back 15, 20 years, all schools were trying this model. And the reality is most of them have kind of given up on it. If you go to our peer schools, almost nobody now has these sorts of campuses abroad. What they do instead is they do JVs or partnerships with foreign institutions. For example, Kellogg has a program with the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, which means that nobody from Kellogg actually ever goes to Hong Kong, right? That's all the classes in Hong Kong are taught by the Hong Kong faculty. Then they may come to Kellogg to take some Kellogg classes. This has become kind of the more standard model now, and you have tons of examples of this. We haven't done that, right? What we're doing instead is when we teach in Hong Kong, it's our own faculty flying to Hong Kong to teach. Now, why do we do this? Well, it's quality control, right? These are Chicago classes leading to a Chicago degree, and we want to make sure that it's offered in the same way that we would do it in Chicago. So I think that's very admirable this is who we are. We feel like there is a Chicago way of teaching that only we can teach. The downside, I don't have to tell you, is that it's insanely expensive to teach the way we teach it, right? You're flying faculty, several thousand miles every few weeks to go teach and then kind of fly back. So it's not the most efficient way of doing it. That said, I don't see that changing. I think this is so core to our school that we want to control our product. I don't see us ever changing that. So the way I think about these foreign campuses is that it's important to our mission because we are teaching a different group of students who are unable to come to Chicago and get the education that we offer. And I feel comfortable that we're giving them the same quality of product. But it also limits the set of locations that we could be in. I don't see us ever expanding beyond sort of where we are, just from a physical standpoint. So I'd like to use those campuses as a way to bring in students from the whole region, as opposed to just being a campus in Hong Kong, right? In Hong Kong, the goal is to really attract students from Japan all the way through like Eastern India. Similarly, in London, the goal isn't really London, it's to attract students from Europe, Middle East, and North, Africa. And I think that's the role that I see for the campuses, is to expand our brand, our network in those regions beyond what we already have sort of in Chicago. And I think that's been, great. These are very different students. They're working in those regions. And I think our faculty benefit by teaching them. Those students benefit by having this group of students from sort of around the region who are all together. So I think that's been great for us. And it gives us obviously a much more expanded sort of alumni base in all of these regions, right? Which I think is a positive. So even though I would say financially the way we organize it may not be the most efficient, I think that's the only way that we can see kind of going forward. I don't see us doing, I mean, the easiest thing would be to do, let's say, an online degree where we just teach people abroad and they never come to Chicago. I don't think we would ever kind of go there. This is kind of the model that we want to do. And the more we have a brand in these regions, the better it is to attract talented students who might want to come and do something else at Chicago, right? And that's the way we're thinking about it, Allison. On the alumni question, I think we would love nothing more than to have alumni play a bigger role at what we do in the school. I always tell our students when they come in for orientation, like they are here not to become like the faculty, they are here to become like the great alumni that they see and hear about. So any connection that we could have with you, we will take it. And whether it's you want to do a deal talk, you want to do an alumni breakfast series meeting, right? You want to come and be a guest lecturer in a class. You help write a case about your company, right? You do sort of an evening event, you recruit students, you help us yield them. We will take any in like whatever it is that you're comfortable doing in engaging with our students. I can assure you there's sort of an unlimited appetite on part of our students to engage with you in these. So we will take any and all, Allison, ways to engage with alumni.
Hey, Madhav, technology continues to be a growing area of interest for the students that you're recruiting to Booth, but also our graduates. How has Booth modified its curriculum to address that, and how has the student experience changed as a result?
Yeah, tech has been a big positive for us as a school, right? I think if you go back to sort of 20, 30 years ago, people went into, investment banking or consulting were kind of the two big areas that our students went into. Consulting continues to be very, very good for us, right? But consulting, I would almost say, is a pass through, right? That nobody's going into consulting thinking 5 years from now I'm still going to be in consulting. A lot of them view it as a great place to begin a career, get a wide set of experience, and then 3 to 4 years out, figure out, oh, I really like this vertical or that industry, and I'm going to move out there. But we are very, very proud of our association with consulting. I think more than something like 33 to 38% of our students kind of go into consulting, right? We have a great reputation in that field. On the other side, though, banking as a field students go into, the interest in that has continued to drop over time. And we now send more students to tech over banking. And I think largely that's because of the product management roles that have arisen in the tech industry, right? These people who kind of understand a little bit about technology, um, and then but also have to manage people, right? They have to understand the marketing side, the user, interface, and how should that be. So these PM roles have become a great uh, outlet for the kinds of things our students want to do. Pretty much everybody who does the joint degree with computer science, for example, ends up in these product management type roles. So with the rise of product management, product marketing, ops roles in tech that require knowledge of data, how do you use it to actually motivate and manage people? That's become a huge positive for us. So finance is still important, don't get me wrong, but banking within that has come down. Within finance, the interest has shifted more to asset management, private equity, venture capital, hedge funds, fields like that. And that's been a positive. So I would say, just stepping back, we are now very happy as a school that we have kind of a three pillars, right? You kind of have consulting, you have finance as a whole, and you have tech as a field that students go into. The curriculum has moved dramatically, right? We have a lot of courses that are basically about uh, not just reading a case on big data and how you use it. We actually will give you data, right? So one of our courses, right, you'll get data from Uber, and you're told to analyze it and decide what decisions would you make, based on this data, right? How would you change the way you're marketing something based on the scanner data that I'm giving you? So the notion of actually using data, work, getting your hands dirty with it, and figuring out how to make decisions and move them, that permeates now all of our courses. And that's been great background for our students who then want to go take these sorts of tech sort of product management roles. And I would say it's not just in tech narrowly defined, right? So This could be a product management job working at a big financial services company. So finance, as you know, tech is sort of more and more a big part of finance. And so if you look at a company like, a Capital One, right, they need product managers too. So we have MBA students moving into PM type roles, which are more tech jobs, but in financial services. And I think we do a really good job providing a curriculum that is very, very broad to be able to support that. Many of them are taught by a tenure line faculty, but we have a lot of courses also taught by adjuncts, alumni, practitioners who kind of come back to booth and teach one course a year. That's become very, very popular for us, right? We have I think this year, something like 80 to 90 adjunct courses, and we have about a 150 tenure line faculty. And I think that's a very good mix for us.
Great. Well, you're leading me into the next question with
Okay.
that answer. And I'd also like to add for everybody on the call, there is the chat function. If you have a question, you can enter it into chat. So we are taking questions via chat. But talking about data in
Mhm.
financial industries, can you briefly discuss the deciding factors that led to the sale of Crisp to Morningstar?
So I will preface this by saying it hasn't closed yet. I mean,
Yeah.
so
So
we announced.
don't count the money yet, right?
So we announced it a month ago. We're hoping, let me touch wood. We're hoping, close in early November. And so honestly, so let me just back up, right? CRISP has been historically, CRISP was set up in the 1960s, as you know, uh, based on a grant that Merrill Lynch gave at the time, because they wanted to find out what was the long run return on stocks, right? Which in the 1960s, people didn't really know what it was. So they gave a grant to the school. The school set up the first database at that time. Jim Lorry, who was a faculty member, was hugely involved in that. And so essentially, Booth created, Chicago GSB created the very first sort of time series of stock price data. And so they set that up in the 60s. And I think that the structuring of CRISP at the time, Center for Research and Security Prices, and the data that they were able to generate, combined with having great faculty, right? Gene, Merton Miller, Myron Scholes, that was a great combination, right? Great faculty, very interesting, innovative data. That really led, I think, to the explosion of sort of modern finance being created at Chicago. Over time, then CRISP essentially became a data source. So if you're a faculty member at a Princeton or a Wharton, you're using stock price data that comes from CRISP, right? CRISP essentially became a provider of high quality data feeds to academics for the most part, but also to hedge funds, and others. And then about, I guess, 12, 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, CRISP took on a second product line, which is that it became an index provider, essentially to Vanguard, right? So if you had a Vanguard domestic equity fund, you were being pegged to indexes that CRISP was maintaining. And so it kind of had these two product lines. But over time, CRISP drifted from being just a part of the finance faculty to kind of becoming its own entity. It wasn't even on campus. So many of you know, it was sort of, downtown. And it became this sort of odd combination of having something that was very research focused on the one hand, but also with a commercial side on the other hand. And so about 5 years ago, we made it a separate LLC. So the employees become their own employees, largely to enable CRISP to sort of do more with the assets that it had. But over time, I think it kind of became clear that CRISP needed more than we were able to give it, right? Like if we really wanted CRISP to be successful, it needed the kind of sort of investment, distribution capability that we really couldn't provide as a not-for-profit. Not that I was looking to sell it at all, but we had some inquiries from people who were interested in it. And so once that happened, again, we never intended to sell it. So we had to do a lot to structure it to get it into a form ready for a potential sale, right? We needed GAAP earnings, audited reports, all kinds of due diligence that kind of had to be done. So we did all that. We actually did a process because I didn't want to just say oh, I sold it to somebody who wanted to buy it. So we did a whole process. And then in the end, we were, I think, quite excited that Morningstar was interested. Morningstar is a Chicago firm, very Chicago Booth, founded by Joe Mansueto. The current CEO, Kunal, is a Booth alum. And they had, obviously, they're huge in data. They're a big, provide tons of data for financial services, managing, ranking of mutual funds. They own PitchBook, for example. So they're in the space. They had a real interest in CRISP and the synergies it could bring. I think the Chicago connection was sort of very important as well for us. And we were pleased that they had a strong interest in doing it. So it wasn't something we were looking to do, but I think it was clearly the right decision for Booth, for Morningstar, and for Vanguard, right? Who was the very important third party because, ultimately, Morningstar is now going to be managing 3 trillion in indexes for Vanguard. So this was a complicated situation because of the tripartite nature of it, but I think it was the right decision for everybody. And from the school standpoint, the reaction has been entirely positive. Um, some couple of Gene students said, "Oh, what did Gene think about this?" Gene Farmer student, what did he think? And I said, "Well, he was happy when he found out the price." So that's a very So that's the Chicago response to it, right? Like you have an asset, but you found somebody who could create higher value for it, and therefore there was a transaction.
That's great. So, Madhav, given the news about financial challenges at the University of Chicago, some of which are self-inflicted, some of which are due to changes in government policies about funding, what is the financial condition of Booth? And is Booth being asked to help support or subsidize the overall university?
So the university's, I think, financial situation, I think, has been in the news a lot, right? Including from some U Chicago faculty writing about it. Some of it is correct, some of it is obviously incorrect, as these things go. So I would say that the university has, as Bill said, some self-inflicted things, largely structural issues. And I think that goes back to, again, the financial crisis. And at that point, after the crisis happened and interest rates became basically zero, there was sort of this huge rush to borrow and build, to expand the college, to build these new dorms that you see now, and I think so it was the right decision, I think, Bill, to use that as a time to make investments as opposed to retrenching. So that was a great, I think, decision. But I think over time, the university kind of kept borrowing to fund these sort of expansions and didn't really pay as much attention to the financial situation as they should have, to the extent that there is like a structural deficit, I would say. Now we're a not-for-profit, so nobody's expecting we're going to be going out and making money. But at some point, the structural part became kind of too big. And I think the good thing in the last couple of years is there's been a real recognition that that is the case, and there needs to be a conscious decision about, okay, what are things we shouldn't be doing anymore? And that's the conversation we've been having the last couple of years. And that's now been accelerated with the potential changes to grant funding, for example. Now, we are not affected, we being Booth, because we don't take federal money. We don't have faculty relying on federal grants. But if you look at the biological sciences, right, they rely on getting grants from the NIH, and potentially that could get affected. So short answer is we're not directly affected. We don't really take federal money. And so that's not an issue. We're very, very strong financially as Booth, but we're part of a university that does have a structural deficit. And the idea of Booth sort of subsidizing the university, I mean, that's just the reality in every business school, university environment. Whether you're Wharton at Penn or Columbia Business School at Columbia, that's just the nature of the beast, right? If you look at a university as a multi-divisional company, or in any company that all of you are with, some divisions are going to make money and some divisions are not making money and are investments. And that's kind of true at Chicago too, right? There's Booth, and obviously we're very financially stable. There's the hospital, which is financially stable, although a lot more volatility, you would say. But then you have, the Crown School of Social Work, or you have the theater, right? Or school of the Divinity School, public policy, which are not going to be able to generate those kinds of resources. So this is just a fact of life in a university, that you'll have some schools support others. The identity of the school may change. At Stanford, the business school is basically break even, but engineering subsidizes pretty much everything else, right? And that's just at Chicago, Booth and the hospital have to do their fair share to make sure everything else works. At Penn, Wharton does that. So I think it's one of these things you could complain about, but it's kind of pointless. It is what it is. But I will say one of the things that we've been able to do ever since I came is we've had multi-year agreements with the university on what is it that Booth is going to be able to do, how much Booth can reinvest in itself, how much I can take for capital projects. And it's is it fun negotiating these things? No. But we've been very, I think, successful at both doing well for Booth and being able to do enough for the university. I have never felt constrained in anything that I've had to do for Booth by the fact that I have to subsidize the university, right? That to me, I've never had to make a bad decision for Booth because I felt like I had to give the money to the university. Because we've been growing, we've been successful, we have great alumni engagement, we've been doing really well on the philanthropic side, and we've been able to kind of keep it both going. So I would just view it as we've been able to get to a win-win and we'll keep it. I do think the university has a 4-year, 5-year plan now to bring the deficit down. And there are two. So there's all kinds of stuff you'll read. Oh, the university lost money on crypto. No, it's kind of hard to lose money on crypto nowadays, right? So I don't think that's actually true. The two big decisions they're making, one is that they've scaled down dramatically the size of the big science building that they were going to build, which would have been huge amount of resources. So they've scaled it down. The second big decision is they're expanding the college, right? The college right now takes about 1,700 to 1,800 students a year. So let's think of it as 7,200 total. They're going to take it up to 9,000, right? In a short period of time. And that plus the other reductions they're doing, you may have read that they stopped some PhD admissions for certain departments. So these are all things that you could have said, well, they should have done it already. But, again, there is a time at which these decisions get taken. I'm pretty confident that this is not going to be an issue 4 or 5 years from now.
So when you said, were you talking about the undergrad is being expanded to 9,000?
Yes. So
Okay,
undergrad
so-
will expand to 9,000. So they're taking 1,800 students a year,
Right.
and they're going to expand it to whatever, 2,250. And right now they've kind of started it already, Alison, by taking in transfer students.
Okay.
But I think they're just going to start expanding it right from
Accepting
the
more,
first year
yeah.
over time. And I mean, look, the undergrad, like other top peer institutions, they get 45,000 applications now. So it's not like they're kind of dipping, down to a level they shouldn't. They get 45,000 students. Their yield is insane. I think their yield is close to 90%. Jim does a fantastic job, Nondorf.
Yeah.
So going from 1,800 students to, let's say, they go to 2,200 students, that's going to make almost no change to the quality of the class coming in. And you could argue it's fulfilling a social mission, right? Like if you're a top university, giving access to more people is sort of a good thing. And I think you're going to see this across the board, by the way. A lot of universities at that level who have kind of kept themselves small are going to change that over the next few years.
Well, which leads into a question that came in through the chat. So a basic question of how the Masters in Management, Masters in Finance programs are going, and do you have plans to expand those?
Not at this time. I think that we began, I think, at the right scale, which is 2 sections, 120 students each. The demand is certainly there to sustain it at that level. Interestingly, I think when we started the programs, my guess would have been that over time we could expand the Masters in Finance, right? That just seems so much more naturally in our wheelhouse. We have the great faculty, we have the reputation, we would do it. I think actually the Masters in Management in the long run could be bigger. It's hit upon this whole sort of market that honestly has not been served at all, which is students who do an undergrad and they have something that they're very passionate about, right? And whatever it is, right? They study the classics, right? Philosophy, whatever it is, and then they come to sort of the junior, senior year, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what is kind of next for me if I want to get a job? And I think the Masters in Management just provides a nice bridge for those students to say, okay, come for a year, learn things that, like in finance or marketing or accounting, entrepreneurship, whatever it is, that help you get your first job. So as opposed to going to an undergrad business school, do an undergrad in whatever it is you're really like interested or passionate about. But then this can be like an add-on to it that then leads you to your first job. So I think that so if you're doing liberal arts undergrad, if you're doing engineering, right, some pure sciences, it's a nice bridge between that to their sort of first role. So I think actually, Alison, that could become much bigger. As I said, we're piloting this sort of global version of it this year. We'll see how that goes. I know one of my visions is both for the finance and masters in management, you could have a program that's basically like, okay, you spend autumn in Chicago, winter in Hong Kong, spring in London, and then you kind of come back to Chicago. I think a program like that that gives international exposure where they'll actually be working with companies in those regions and then preparing you for your first job outside, I think that could be very popular. So it just seems like we're tapping in an area where there really hasn't been anything like this. And just to back up, if you go to Europe, uh, the modal degree people do is a master's in management right out of undergrad. It's just something we've never seen in the US. So in some ways you could say, well, you're kind of copying what people in Europe have already done. And I'm like, well, there's nothing wrong with copying, right? Like it's working in that space. And it really hasn't been a conflict with our MBA because the MBA we have reserved for students who have multiple years of full-time work experience. The MIM is really for students who come straight from undergrad. So I think in the long run, I could see MIM going up to 3 sections maybe, but maybe keeping the MIF at 2. But I don't think we plan to expand them beyond that.
Too bad
Here's a question.
kids that want to come in, right? You have such talented applicants. So
Yeah.
Hey, Madhav, Booth just announced the Tolan Healthcare Center. And what's kind of interesting about this for me is that I actually entered Booth as in the health administration program. So I know other alumni like myself that were in health administration are really happy to see this come about. What are you hearing from alumni and donors that see Chicago take leadership in developing the center?
No, you make a great point. I mean, when we had a faculty, meeting to discuss this new concentration in healthcare, and Gene Farmer put his hand up and said, "Hey, we used to have one. Did you know that?" And of course we're like, so it's kind of like going, like a circle. I think that I think it's great that we're in this space. We've gotten fantastic alumni reaction to it. We waited to do it till we had enough faculty who could actually do this, to manage it. And I think that's something we've tried to do at Chicago always, whether it's initiatives or centers. It has to be faculty driven, right? Anything where I have an idea and I try to propose it is bound to fail in this environment. But the faculty, we hired Matt Noto back from Northwestern, and we had Dan Edelman, who does a ton of operations work in healthcare. That combination has been fantastic, right? Somebody who thinks about how to structure, how do you structure an operating room more efficiently? And that's the kind of stuff Dan does. Matt's stuff is more about the economics of healthcare. How is healthcare actually working in the US? What modifications should we do to Medicaid programs to make it successful? So I think that's been a great combination. And we have a great advisory group and now support from Mary Tolan to name the center. We relaunched the healthcare concentration now. We're trying to scale up the MD MBA program with the University of Chicago. So I would say it's been sort of overwhelmingly positive, the reaction. And it turns out we have a lot of alumni who've been very successful in healthcare, whether it's in, running healthcare firms. The CEO of Centene is our alum, for example, I think at some point the CEO of McKesson was our alum. And people who run big healthcare consulting practices. And so we have a lot of alumni who know a lot about this space, and they feel like having a Chicago lens on this will be important. Big part of GDP, obviously, right? Whatever, 17 to 20%, but also a field that many people would say has a lot of inefficiencies built into it. So if you were to take sort of a good non-ideological Chicago look at this space, how could we have an impact? And I feel like we have the right faculty involved, the right set of alumni who have been connected to it, great student interest, right? The new healthcare classes are very popular. And I would say the university is very happy with us, Bill, because we've been able to do something that kind of connects to the university. The U Chicago Medicine has been asking us, hey, could we help do programs where we combine U Chicago Medicine faculty and Booth faculty to think about organizing healthcare, systems better. So this has been positive, great alumni support, and we're just thrilled to kind of keep that going.
Great. Yeah, unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. Madhav, we want to thank you for your time today, for joining us for this discussion. I want to thank you for your leadership of the Booth School. The school has done so well under your leadership. Business leadership is a liberal arts activity. You've introduced creativity into the curriculum while also maintaining its empirical rigor as a program, maintaining its reputation. I've spoken with students, I've spoken with faculty members, I've spoken with staff, and there's a vibe now at Chicago Booth that I think is really terrific. So I want to thank you for all that you've done for our school. And I think it's great that the university is also recognizing your leadership and asking you to engage to expand its reach globally. And to everybody who's joined us today, on behalf of the Dean, myself, Alison, and all of us at Chicago Booth, thank you for joining us. We know that you have a lot of demands on your time, and we appreciate your participating today. We're grateful to have you as investors in our school, and we value your continued support. The Chicago Booth team will send out a recording of today's conversation in the coming weeks. Have a great day, and thanks again for participating.
Thank you, Bill and Alison.